This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
The opinions on this program are those of the program host and guest and not necessarily those of WPSL. WPSL does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WPSL.
Go to WPSL.com.
Legal questions? Ask a lawyer.
Go to
Give us a call at
WPSL.com.
340-1590, 340-1590 here at the studios of WPSL. And Ask a Lawyer with your host, attorney Stuart M. Address.
Good morning. This is Stuart Address for Ask a Lawyer. It is January 21st, 2022. We are getting deeper into January.
Hey, that's a nice fan.
It's not moving right now.
Yeah, I know. We can't see your head, though.
Oh, well.
There you go.
Yeah.
Oh, now we got you.
You know, Facebook right now is not connecting. It keeps saying there's a bad connection and it keeps going over and over and over again trying to reconnect. So I guess anybody on Facebook's going to be asking me afterwards what happened.
Ask a lawyer.
Ask a lawyer. You get a technological answer. I don't know.
Ask a lawyer, and thank you, Comcast.
Yeah, it usually is Comcast's problem. Like I've gone on the phone with them many times this week. So, a more important news.
Don't they have a legal obligation to actually supply the service?
Oh, goodness gracious, yes. You know how many times I've thought of filing a breach of contract suit against them, or a class action, or an antitrust action?
Oh, boy.
I don't have the energy anymore. If I was in my 20s or 30s, I'd probably do it. Right now, let some big giant law firm do it. I'll do what I do best.
Well, I'm still in the state of shock when I see video of that building at 30 Rock with a Comcast name on the side. It startles me.
Yeah. So last week, we were continuing a discussion about the recent Supreme Court decisions, two of them, regarding President Biden's mask mandate, both as it applied to federal workers, as it applied to health workers, and as it applied generally to corporations with more than 100 employees. And, we were basically winding down on that topic, and I intend to try to wind it down and maybe make this the last episode of this little show about this topic. But what's the gist that we take away from our discussion so far? At the end of the day, the court's split decision sends a message to us and to President Biden. In my view, the decision in favor of the mask mandate with regard to health workers and striking down the mask mandate with regard to corporations with more than 100 employees sends a message of, we're not against you on everything, but you can't just expect us to ignore the traditional powers of agencies just because there's a pandemic on. Healthcare agencies can regulate healthcare. Workplace agencies have to stick to regulating workplaces. And so I view the court's decisions as, look, the healthcare agency regularly regulates healthcare, so they can continue to do so. The OSHA, the workplace, has to stick to workplaces. It can't continue to go beyond that into the general health of employees. So what does this mean for the theory I suggested about the power of employers to require masking or vaccination? Well, in some respects, nothing. These decisions are about federal power only. The court actually acknowledges the concept of the OSHA obligation. And so in a civil suit, employers may prevail on requirements and employees may prevail if there is no such requirement or if it is not applied in a non-discriminatory manner. In other words, we have to look very carefully again at the fact pattern of an employer which either requires or denies the masking obligation or vaccination obligation. Indeed, there are some commentators who regularly study the Supreme Court and constitutional law who have made a couple of assessments about these two decisions. First, the government could try again with a new rule, devising a more tailored emergency rule for a specific set of higher risk companies may address the court majority's criticism of employers' mandates as a blunt instrument. Or the agency, OSHA, could use its traditional rulemaking powers, and that might take years and take us hopefully past the pandemic, because what it tried to do was to exercise emergency powers and abbreviate the process. If it had gone through its traditional rulemaking process with the opportunity for public comment, the court might have allowed the rule to withstand, but of course, that would take us, past the need for it and, would likely render it moot. So it didn't do it that way. Now, also, second, this doesn't stop employers from enforcing their own mandates, but it makes the move more dangerous. Companies that were on the fence about requiring masks or requiring vaccinations might not now introduce them because of fear of civil liability. Frankly, I don't look at it that way. The Supreme Court made a decision on federal power. It did nothing with regard to using the OSHA rules that generally exist, which say that an employer may not put an employee in an unusually dangerous situation to his health or life. I still believe that this provides for viable civil liability lawsuits against an employer who requires an employee to come to work, let's say, and has people packed into a bullpen with these little low cubicles where everybody sneeze goes 5 cubicles down. So these are the fact by fact examinations that we would have to make. Now, the dissent of the 3 liberal justices on the court noted a few things that were interesting. First, COVID-19 is a menace to work settings, the 3 justices said. The proof is all around us. And since the disease's onset, most Americans have seen their workplaces transformed. The justices continued in the dissent that therefore the administrative agency charged with ensuring health and safety in the workplace did what Congress commanded it to do. It took action to address COVID-19's continuing threat in those spaces. The OSHA emergency temporary standard requiring either vaccinations or masking and testing was designed to protect American workers. The standard falls within the core of the agency's mission to protect employees from grave danger that comes from new hazards or exposure to harmful agents. The justices said that OSHA's own estimates is that the standard would save 6,500 lives and prevent over 250,000 hospitalizations in 6 months' time. Yet, we have the two decisions, one that strikes down this general requirement for workplaces of over 100, but allows the more narrow requirement relating to healthcare workers. In concluding their dissent, the three more liberal justices said, and I'm going to quote, "In our view, the court's order seriously misapplies the applicable legal standards, and in so doing, it stymies the federal government's ability to counter the unparalleled threat that COVID-19 poses to our nation's workers. Acting outside of its competence and without legal basis, the court displaces the judgments of the government officials given the responsibility to respond to workplace health emergencies," end quote. Well, it may come as no surprise to you that I agree with the dissent. It seems to me that OSHA had a core obligation that was delegated to it by Congress, and that, of course, Congress's original delegation wasn't going to necessarily speak about pandemics because it wasn't on anybody's mind. We hadn't had one since the early 1900s. However, when you look at the purpose of OSHA, this seems like a rational emergency standard and does definitely seem designed to save lives and prevent hospitalizations.
And besides, we only had about 30 senators who were around in 1918. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's true. And we've only had about 880,000 Americans die so far during this pandemic. And if that doesn't speak to the necessity of acting in the public good, I don't know what does. And we're going to discuss that a little bit more specifically later in the show. So what did this all do to the employer's ability to require COVID testing or vaccination as a condition to return to work or remain at work? Well, they are able to follow the EEOC's guidance that was issued during the pandemic, which provided several principles for employers to follow. It said firms can ask employees whether they are vaccinated. That would be a legitimate inquiry, even though normally inquiring as to health status would not be permissible and be a violation of the right to privacy.
Okay, I ask you, for all the businesses that do not have 100 employees, do you have the right to ask your employee about that?
No, not according to EEOC guidance. I mean, I had this problem just this week. Somebody called my office. They were clearly being sexually harassed. I mean, if you look at all the elements and all the standards, they were being sexually harassed. But I couldn't do anything for them because their company had less than 15 employees. So by definition, they were not being sexually harassed. Now, that sounds absurd, but Congress drew the line somewhere. And, you know, this is a result of compromise. The line for the Family and Medical Leave Act is 50 employees. The line for Title VII of the Civil Rights Act is 15. And so if you're in a company of 5 and the boss is hitting on you and asking you out on dates and grabbing your butt and brushing up against your breasts, is that lawful? No, it's not, but there's nothing you could do to sue about it except for maybe the tort of battery. Anyway, we have Tom on line 1, so let's take his call.
Tom, go ahead.
Stuart, hi, how are you?
I'm good, Tom. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Hey, I have a question for you related to something that's come up. So 3 months ago, I had a regular physical done, which involved having some blood work, blood drawn for blood tests. but I've never been able to get the results from the test back.
Oh, goodness.
And when I contact the doctor's office, they have given me a very vague, the doctor says your results are fine, and that's about it. So I'm curious if there are any suggestions you might have.
Sure.
I've been writing them a letter once a month to ask for the records, but so far they're just ignoring those. So I'm just kind of curious if you have any.
Well, I know somebody who has the exact same problem with test results and not being able to get them, and it's very frustrating. First, let me ask you this. Did you get them done at either Quest or LabCorp?
So one of the things is, because I've checked with the insurance company as to how the billing was done, and they said the billing was done through the doctor's office, so they do not know which
was the blood drawn at the doctor, or did you go to a lab?
No, they were drawn at the doctor's office.
Okay, all right.
Was the doctor part of Martin Health Group?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, because they have a portal that you can automatically go to, and you'll see it same day.
Right, Martin Health, Quest, LabCorp, they all had.
Okay, my doctor's practice does have a patient portal. The patient portal continues to say the results are pending.
And the doctor says on his end, the results were fine, but you can't actually see the results or get them.
That's, yeah, I got, so they gave me a voice message once that said, the doctor says your lipids are fine. And that's as far as they've gone in reporting.
Well,
so I don't know if that's, yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. You're the caller. You do have the right to the results. The question becomes, how far do you want to go in trying to obtain them? Because, you know, the doctor could say, I don't want to treat you anymore because, you know, you've become a pain in my posterior. I mean, I would suggest
that isn't a problem because I've already decided I'm changing doctor.
Okay, all right. I don't know. Oh gosh, the name of the statute offhand, or where you would find it. It's in the Florida statutes. You might be able to Google it. I would Google medical records, patient rights, and physician records. There is a provision that requires the doctor to provide you with all your records and test results upon your request. And there is a procedure, a penalty procedure, if the physician's office does not do so, where you are able to file an administrative complaint. I don't think it's with, it may be with DBPR, the Department of Business and Professional Regulation, the doctors section, but you are able to file an administrative complaint, and then they send a request to the doctor to respond to the complaint, and usually that gets you what you want very, very quickly, because the doctor doesn't feel like having a wider investigation than is necessary that might uncover unintended or intended shortcuts and, you know, lead to fines and possibly, you know, license suspensions or revocations or warnings. It's similar to the Florida bar situation with lawyers. But I just don't know that statute offhand because I've only had to use it once or twice.
Yeah, I did look up in the Florida state records, and there are a few interesting things there. But it seemed like the only things I could find for reporting this would be in the area of Medicare fraud, and I didn't.
Yeah, that's not this.
But I did notice something really interesting about the corporate entity that I'm dealing with. They seem to shut down and reopen as a new name every 3 years. And
that is suspicious. I've seen things like that happen before.
I didn't quite understand why they would need to be doing that.
Well, you would do that if you're trying to avoid legal liability. And, you know, the first line of defense would be, well, that corporation doesn't exist anymore, and you can't sue this corporation because we never provided you with service. The reality is a lawyer can follow the trail, and if a company has been dissolved and then reconstituted with the same principles and let's say with the same equipment, you know, let's say the equipment wasn't sold from party A to party C, and then party A creates party B. You know, if party A creates party B and gives the equipment to party B, the court's going to view that as one corporate entity. It's going to view it as a sham.
Okay, right. So you just said court. So, I mean, obviously, I'm trying to do this without getting in front of courts, but
Right.
is small claims an option for?
No, because that's for money.
Fine.
That's all the small claims court can do is give money, and money's not the issue here. You know, if you call my office next week and mention that you spoke with me, you know, today, I will try to look for the state statute that basically says to the doctor, give me my records or else.
Okay, and I'll try to Google that too. So,
All right.
thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Take care.
You know, that's very interesting about Tom and the lack of records. I went to get my blood drawn once, and I do once a year. And all of a sudden, my doctor called, just absolutely freaking, that there was a lady right behind me, ready to go into the suite after I left. Well, apparently they confused the two blood things. And you know, she was way off the charts. And then, of course, my doctor just freaked out, called right away, you know, as soon as they got him. And he said, I got to get you retested. And they did. And then right after that, they started putting your name on the vials right away.
Oh, you know, I go to Quest. They always put your name on each vial. They show me the vial and make me, and your birth date, and they make me verify it visually. And then I sign a piece of paper that says that, you know, this vial is correct.
And that started happening after I had my mix up.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was crazy. Just crazy. Yeah.
I mean, I used to use LabCorp. They did the same thing. For the last several years, you know, my insurers told me to go to Quest. And they, without fail, you know, they label each vial of blood they draw, write the name on it and the birth date, and then have me look at it before I leave to verify that it was done correctly.
Yeah, mine does too now. Yeah. But they have separate forms, and you have to initial them. You have to sign them. Yeah. It's great.
Well, so pending any other calls to 772-340-1590, which I would enjoy answering, whether it's questions or some comments about things that we've discussed. I will otherwise continue here and note that, you know, employers are generally under guidance from the EEOC that they can ask employers whether they were vaccinated. They can require employees to become vaccinated in order to enter the workplace under federal equal employment opportunity laws. Firms, companies implementing vaccine policies should consider certain best practices. For example, under Title VII, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, they have to keep those things in mind. Firms that implement mandatory vaccine policies must consider exceptions for employees with disabilities who require a reasonable accommodation. If an employee claims that he or she cannot become vaccinated due to a sincerely held religious belief, the employer must engage in a reasonable accommodation analysis. So in other words, just because it's a reasonably held religious belief doesn't give everybody carte blanche not to follow the vaccination or mask rule. There is a balancing test. and we balance the employee's constitutional right against the potential harm to the employer or other employees. And this goes centrally into what we're going to discuss at the end, which is a balancing test of interests. So keep that in mind. You were going to say something, Greg?
Yeah, I think that tennis player
Novak Djokovic.
learned the hard way about trying the religious.
Yeah, he sure did. And, you know, there are a number of athletes who have decided, I'll say, remain stubborn. Do they have the right? Maybe they do. You know, there are a lot of people out there that talk about, you know, personal individual rights. And again, we're going to talk about that in summary fashion near the end. But, you know, he learned that just because he had a medical pass from the Tennis Federation and from what is the equivalent of our state, let's say the state of California or the state of Florida, didn't mean that the federal government was going to allow him in. And the fact that, you know, he didn't check that out left him in custody for several days, and left him out of custody for a few more before Australia determined to kick him out. And then France and other countries have implemented similar rules. So he's either going to have to get vaccinated or he won't be playing much tennis anymore this year. You know, we've had this in the NFL. We've had this in the NBA, the New Jersey Nets. We've had this in baseball. This is not unusual. I think we have it in hockey too. But these individuals are basically asserting individual rights arguments. And the balancing test is, well, yeah, you may have the right in the abstract not to do something that you believe might potentially harm you, or for whatever reason. But do you have that right when your failure to do that exposes others to death? And we see where the answers are coming down from administrative agencies, athletic agencies, and I think they're coming down correctly on the side of, well, your right does not supersede the right of the overall population to keep themselves safe from death. And that, again, I'm going ahead a little bit, but, you know, as American citizens, we do have certain rights that are given to us by the Constitution. But we also implicitly make a compact with the government that as part of this country, as a citizen of this country, we are going to recognize that in certain instances, the government may temporarily curtail our rights. Now, is something like that subject to abuse? You better believe it is, and therefore it's subject to judicial review. In my view, President Trump would be abusing this like crazy. However, he felt it best fit his interests. Fortunately, I don't think we have many presidents like President Trump, and hopefully never will again. But in general, it is hopeful that we elect people that are going to be looking out for the best public interest. I know that may sound naive or fanciful these days, but traditionally, that is what we hire our Congress people to do and our president to do. And we rely upon them to look out for the greater good. Sometimes that helps us, and sometimes it hurts us temporarily, like closing down businesses, you know, quarantining everybody to their homes except to go food shopping or whatever. I mean, I remember when we were first quarantined and I had a legitimate reason to be on the road. I was on the turnpike and there wasn't a car anywhere. And I remember commenting, wow, look at this. Nobody is out. That was an extraordinary action taken by the government, including the state of Florida. And nobody was really heard vociferously complaining about it back then. It was accepted as necessary. But, then we have a governor here who wants to be Trump. And so that governor has been saying things that are factually incorrect, that are, to borrow a new phrase, fake news, and has been using it as a reason to put us in more danger. And in fact, he handpicks a secretary of the State Department of Health who says things that are medically absurd, scientifically absurd. But he says them because the governor needs him to say them to implement a policy or some rule. And, look, I know there are those of you out there who disagree with me, and I'll respect the disagreement. But in my view, policies of any government official that are designed to kill off voters are not really well thought out. And hey, look, I'm going to get into the numbers in a little bit. When we get near the end and I get that little warning from Greg, I'm going to go right into the heart of numbers. And, this is an absurd thing. So let me move from the employer rights and say, so this is where we now stand. The government has been blocked in many respects. The employers may continue to act if they have the guts to do so. Many were looking to the federal government mandate for employers with employee over 100 as cover to do this and to say, hey, we're forced to do this, instead of being blamed by the workers for doing it themselves. So where do we stand right now with daily cases, hospitalizations, and deaths? By the way, in case any of you don't know, aren't glued to CNN or Fox or MSNBC like I am, 99.5% of all new COVID cases in the country are of the Omicron variant. It has completely taken over. It's much more transmissible, fortunately, a bit less virulent. So, positive cases of COVID. We're up to 782,000 per day, which is up 35% over the last 7 days moving average, up a third over just the last 7 days. Now, in January of 2021, 1 year ago, we were at our lowest with approximately 10,000 positive cases a day nationwide. We're now up to 782,000, an increase of 78-fold. Think of it this way. If you had invested $10,000 in the stock market in January of 2021, just 1 year ago, you'd now have $782,000. You'd be, yelling, Eureka, Eureka. Oh my goodness, I'm rich. But now think of it in the reverse way. Think of it with regard to COVID. So that 10,000 equaling 782,000 is horrific. It's as horrific as it would be marvelous if it was a stock. And I don't know why nobody understands that fact. Hospitalizations. We're at 21,000 a day now nationally, up 25% over the last 7 days moving average, up a quarter. July of 2021 saw us at our lowest, about 2,000 hospitalizations per day nationwide. And now we're at 21,000 7 days later, up tenfold. Something seems to be wrong here. Deaths, a result from which we cannot come back. 1,700 a day now nationwide, up 37% over the prior 7-day moving average. In June of 2021, just 6 months ago, we were at about 400 deaths a day nationwide. 400 deaths a day nationwide. We're now at 1,700, more than 4 times that amount. What does that say to you about what our policies statewide and nationwide are doing? Does it say the policies are working? Does it say these are the right, correct policies to impede the virus and make it go away? You know, in Florida, we have had 5.3 million positive cases to date and 63,000 deaths. How many of those deaths were of somebody you knew? How many of those deaths were of a family member, a friend of a family member? You know, I remember back when we first decided to go to war after 9/11. And they were calling up everybody, even from the National Guard Reserve. Everybody was going over to Iraq or Afghanistan. There wasn't anybody who didn't know somebody who was being called up to go to war. Anybody that didn't know somebody that they would be worried about. Well, it's almost that way right now. I mean, 63,000 dead Floridians. I don't care, and I don't know if they were registered Democrat or Republican. All I know is 63,000 people have died from something that nobody ever expected would happen in the 21st century, a pandemic.
I don't think it says D or R on your death certificate.
No, it doesn't. You know, it says human being. And why do we politicize this? Who wants this baloney? In the United States, 69 million positive cases to date and 860,000 deaths. 860,000. Think of that for a moment. Do you really feel like taking the time to count from 1 to 860,000? If you did, I think you'd be doing it quite a long time. I haven't worked out the numbers, but maybe I will for next show. 860,000 Americans have died from something which nobody was giving a second thought to, because nobody thought that in this day and age we could have a pandemic like the Spanish flu or the bubonic plague. I mean, these were stuff of the Middle Ages. And here we are, some virus gets out, and we've lost 860,000 Americans. We've lost Americans who were vaccinated. We've lost Americans who weren't vaccinated. We've lost Americans who were vocally anti-vaccination, that had a public stature to communicate that vocal opposition to others, and then ended up dying from it. People who said this was fake, who got the virus and died. Anybody out there still wants to claim it's fake? Anybody out there really can still make the argument that I have the right not to wear a mask? I have the right not to get vaccinated? When, if you have at least an elementary school education, you must realize that this is different than whether you have the right or don't have the right to do something that only impacts you. I'm probably with you on that side. But this impacts everybody who you're around. Friend, stranger, customer, anybody. How can anybody still say with a straight face, I have the right not to wear a mask, I have the right not to get vaccinated? Can anybody credibly claim a moral basis to reject masks or vaccines? I'd love to talk to you. It would be fascinating if nothing else. The freedom that you claim over your own body makes no sense in this situation, where your supposed freedom can kill anyone around you. In such a case, our compact with our government as a citizen requires that we reject the freedom of the one for the freedom of the group, for the betterment of the group. In California, the issue of detaining people with tuberculosis came before an appellate court, which held in 1966. Quote, health regulations enacted by the state under its police power and providing even drastic measures for the elimination of disease in a general way are not affected by constitutional provisions, either of the state or national government, end quote. That was one representative court's attitude about tuberculosis in 1966. Some scholars who have reviewed the tension between individual rights and the rights of the overall citizenry have commented things like, United States courts have almost always deferred to public health authorities that have deprived individuals of their liberty in the name of public health. One US state high court declared at the beginning of the 20th century, quote, it is unquestionable that the legislature can confer police powers upon public officials for the protection of the public health. The maxim, I'm going to get this wrong, salus populi suprema lex, is the law of all courts in all countries. The individual right sinks in the necessity to provide for the public good, end quote. Indeed, the United States Supreme Court has already answered this question. In state of Massachusetts, I don't know who its verse is here, it doesn't have it. A smallpox epidemic during the winter of 1901 provided the occasion for a legal challenge to the state's compulsory vaccination law. Boy, that sounds familiar. This led to a landmark ruling by the Supreme Court, here it is, in the case of Jacobson versus Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which established the government's right to use its police powers in order to control epidemic disease. In its 7-2 decision, the court affirmed the right of the people through their elected representatives to enact health laws of every description to protect the common good, end quote. So why is any politician making believe and arguing to the contrary right now? Let them argue that that 1901 decision was wrong. At least that's honest. But to argue as if it never existed and doesn't exist and is not still good law, that's deceitful. How many of you listening even knew that the Supreme Court had already ruled on this in 1901 in connection with smallpox? I mean, does it persuade any of you out there that this issue has been resolved and that a decision has been made as to what the police powers are for public health? let's look at the argument that mandatory school vaccinations are subject to parental choice. We've been hearing a lot about that lately. Heard a lot about it from Governor DeSantis, and we've heard about it a lot at Board of Education meetings. People have jumped up and down, and we have the video on YouTube and on the national news and all that. Mandatory immunization of school children clearly intrudes on or burdens parental autonomy. Nobody would disagree with that principle. Yet, the protection of children from infectious disease and the ensuing herd immunity, a high-level vaccination coverage, which protects those who cannot be vaccinated, depends on such mandates. Various outbreaks of measles or pertussis, whooping cough, underscore the toll we have to pay when we privilege parents' choice. It might be a cost worth bearing, but we will only know if we are forced to acknowledge the trade-offs involved. We require, gosh, a host of vaccinations for kids before they start kindergarten and as they work through the primary school system through 12th grade. This is not subject to any dispute. You cannot go in to the Board of Education and say, I don't want to get my child the vaccination against measles and have any chance of getting anywhere with them or with a court. It's not an issue. If it's not an issue that all these vaccinations and boosters can be required before your kid can go to kindergarten and can make his way or way through primary school, who the heck thinks that they have the basis to argue that the schools can't make vaccination against coronavirus one of those requirements? Yet people are out there arguing, you can't do this, parental rights. And your so-called leader, Governor DeSantis, is arguing the same thing as well. He's stupid. Does he not realize that his own state requires various vaccinations and boosters of all children before they start kindergarten and at various points through their primary school education? How can the idiot argue that coronavirus is different? You know, some of the things that we get vaccinated against have basically been killed off. They're not around anymore because we've done such a good job. Yet we still are required to get vaccinated. How is coronavirus any different? I mean, it seems absurd to me. You know, I can argue a point. I'm a lawyer. I can argue out of both sides of my mouth. Tell me you want me to argue for vaccination, for individual rights. I can do that too. But where do I really come down? It's not just that I believe in masks and vaccination to get rid of this dang thing. It's truly that I don't believe there's an argument on the other side. I do not believe there's any credible moral or legal argument on the other side. I simply can't see it. Now, I've been told I have bad eyesight, and I will admit that I have cataracts that are getting worse. But I'm sorry, I don't see it, and it doesn't exist. And I know that just as I know my name, and I don't have to listen to CNN or MSNBC or any of the so-called fake news channels to tell it to me.
What's your name again?
Stuart Mitchell Address. I used to live at 19 Owens Road in Marlboro, New Jersey. My phone number when I was 3 years old was 536-9182.
How do you remember all that stuff?
I just happen to remember it. The 4 digits that my next door neighbor ended with 3765. So please don't tell me that I'm going senile just yet. The bottom line, let me say one other thing. I only have a few minutes left. People who have argued this, a court in Massachusetts noted, quote, from the moment of injury, society picks the person up off the highway, delivers him to a municipal hospital and municipal doctors, provides him with unemployment compensation if after recovery he cannot replace his lost job, and if the injury causes permanent disability, many assume the responsibility for his and his family's continued sustenance. We do not understand a state of mind that permits a plaintiff to think that only he himself is concerned. In other words, you have a court clearly explaining in a personal injury context how the individual impacts everybody. Doctors, hospital resources, unemployment, disability. We are not isolated in this society. So please, don't anybody ever argue, to my face at least, that you have the right against vaccination because it only impacts you. Because I'll either punch you in the face or I'll laugh at you. Hopefully laugh at you. The bottom line, the magnitude of a pandemic entitles our government to take reasonable action. And those who resist it are just perpetuating this epidemic and this pandemic. And you're preventing me from going on my dang honeymoon. So stop it. This is Stuart Address for Ask the Lawyer. I'll talk to you next Friday. Have a safe weekend and a safe week. Thanks very much.
You've been listening to Ask a Lawyer with Stuart Address right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast, and WSTU Stuart, Martin County's heritage station since 1954.